Al and Leah watched as the mission bus pulled away from the Mexican gate. When it cleared the barricade, an officer motioned them to pull forward. Papers were checked, bags were opened. The car was inspected with quiet efficiency. One of the officials smiled when Al handed him a few strands of Mardi Gras beads for his wife. Leah twisted in her seat and looked back down the road. The painted Volkswagen bus was already shrinking into the distance, its bright flowers and peace signs fading against the dust. "Do you think we'll run into more men like those in the arroyo?" she asked. "Hard to say." Al shifted slightly so he could watch the road behind them in the rearview mirror. "We've still got a couple more checkpoints to get through now that we're in Guatemala." The road began to climb into the highlands, the air cooling as the mountain closed around them. Farther inland, another aduana checkpoint appeared. Soldiers stepped out and slowly circled the car, peering inside before they finally waved them on. "That was easy," Leah said, sounding relieved to be away from the leering soldiers. Leah stared out the window as the road wound deeper into the highlands. She was surprised to see wild purple orchids draping from the power lines and trees crowding the roadside. "This place is so different from Mexico," she said. "Yep," Al said with a small nod. "They call it the land of eternal spring." She leaned out the window and took in a deep, cleansing breath. Al seemed to relax a little as he told Leah about Lake Atitlan, a water volcano, and that Tecpán had once been the land of the royal Maya. "Don't let that beauty fool you into thinking all is well," Al said, nodding toward a group of men sitting at a roadside table. "While we're in Guatemala," he said quietly, "don't talk politics with anyone outside Tuto's house." Leah looked over at him. "I mean it," he said. "Say the wrong thing here and it could end worse than meeting those men in the arroyo." The men stopped talking. Leah shivered as she felt their eyes on the Impala until it disappeared around the bend. "We're going to stop here in Tecpán at the market," Al said. "I want to get a few things before we enter the city." Leah stayed quiet after the men on the roadside watched them pass. They stepped through the wide opening of the market and into shadow. She clung to Al's side as they walked through the market. He seemed to know where he was going. From the road, it had looked open and airy, but once inside, the roof swallowed the daylight. Corrugated tin panels stretched high overhead, trapping the heat and the smells of fruit, meat, and wood smoke. A few bare incandescent bulbs hung down on long wires, each one casting a dull yellow circle on a packed dirt floor. Between those circles, the aisles fell into dim gray gloom. The deeper they walked, the darker it became. Women sat behind piles of vegetables stacked in woven baskets. Chickens rustled in crates. Somewhere nearby, a knife struck wood in a steady rhythm. Voices echoed under the metal roof, overlapping in Spanish and Mayan dialects Leah didn't recognize. The air felt thick. She kept close behind Al as he moved easily through the narrow aisles, nodding to vendors as if he had done this 100 times before. He paused at a table piled with avocados and began speaking to a man in rapid Spanish. Leah drifted a few steps to the side. A woman lifted a string of dried peppers from a hook. Someone brushed past her shoulder. The bulb above flickered, and for a moment the aisle ahead seemed to vanish into shadow. She turned back. Al was gone. The crowd shifted between them and the stall where he'd been standing. Bodies moved through the narrow aisles, blocking her view. Her chest tightened. She tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt hot and stale. Sweat gathered along the back of her neck. The low roof and the walls of hanging goods pressed in around her. The bulbs swung slightly on their wires, each pool of light fading into the next light island in a dark sea. Under the dim bulbs, it all blurred together into heaps of dark shapes and dull colors that Leah couldn't quite sort into anything familiar. Leah pushed forward, craning her neck, trying to see over the heads of the people moving past her. Her heart began to pound. The smells grew stronger: raw meat, smoke, overripe fruit. Her stomach roiled. She forced another breath, and it caught halfway down. No air. Her fingers tingled as panic climbed up her spine. The walls of the market seemed to draw closer with every step. She turned abruptly and shoved her way toward the outer edge of the building, where a pale strip of daylight showed between the stalls. When she burst back into the open air, she bent forward with her hands on her knees and dragged in a long breath. Cool mountain air flooded her lungs. For a moment, the world tilted. Then she heard Al's voice behind her. "Leah?" Al waited until Leah's breath steadied before guiding her back toward the car. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though the memory of the dim market still clung to her chest. The Impala rolled out of Tecpán as the afternoon light softened across the highlands. The air was cool at that elevation, almost sharp, and the mountains spread out in wide green folds on either side of the highway. For a while, neither of them spoke. The road gradually widened as they descended toward the valley. Small villages appeared along the roadside. Low concrete houses, women carrying baskets, children kicking a worn ball in the dust. Traffic thickened the closer they came to the capital. Pickup trucks rattled past, overloaded with sacks of corn. Old buses roared along in clouds of diesel smoke. Men stood in the beds of flatbed trucks, holding on to the rails as the vehicles bounced along the highway. The sky was turning the pale gold of early evening when the first military checkpoint outside the city came into view. Sandbags were stacked alongside the road. Soldiers stood behind them with rifles slung across their chests, watching the traffic creep forward. Al slowed the Impala and rolled down the window. One soldier stepped forward and glanced inside the car before waving them through with a short motion of his hand. Neither of them spoke until the checkpoint disappeared in the rearview mirror. The mountains fell away as the road dropped fully into the valley. Ahead of them, the capital spread across the basin in a haze of dust and fading light. Buildings rose in uneven clusters, and the air carried the mixed smells of diesel, cooking fires, and the distant burn of garbage. After the cool clarity of the highlands, the city felt heavier, more crowded, more watchful. Streetlights flickered on as evening settled over the valley. Traffic thickened into a slow river of buses, taxis, and battered cars weaving through narrow lanes. Leah watched the city unfold around them. "This sure feels different," she said quietly. Al kept his eyes on the road. "It is," he replied. They turned off the main avenue and wound through quieter streets lined with high walls and iron gates. Bougainvillea spilled over them in bright cascades of red and purple. Late sun caught the broken glass along the tops, each shard flashing as the car passed. At last, Al slowed in front of a tall wooden gate set into a stucco wall. "This is it," he said. He reached out and pressed the horn once. A light flickered on inside the courtyard. A moment later, the gates began to swing open. Inside the house, the air felt cool and calm after the long drive through the mountains. Voices drifted from a sitting room down the hall. Leah stepped inside and stopped. A television flickered in the corner. It was the first one she had seen in almost 2 weeks. The room was quiet as everyone watched the evening news. Images of crowds and chanting students flashed across the screen, while the announcer spoke rapidly in Spanish. Every few minutes, the broadcast returned to the same story: American hostages being held in Iran. For Leah, the television itself felt strange after days of mountain roads and village markets. The world beyond Guatemala suddenly seemed loud and urgent again. The next day, the city felt normal enough. Cars moved through the streets. Vendors set up their carts along the sidewalks. The smell of tortillas and roasting meat drifted through the air in the evenings. But 2 days later, the atmosphere shifted. The television stayed on most of the day in Tuto's house. The announcers spoke in urgent tones as cameras showed police and soldiers surrounding the Spanish embassy in the center of the city. Protesters had taken the building. Government trucks and armored vehicles formed a tight ring around the block. Soldiers crouched behind the barricades with rifles ready. The government announcers repeated the same message again and again. There would be no negotiations. The house grew quiet as everyone watched. Then a sudden crack rang out through the television speakers. A gunshot. The soldiers outside the embassy dropped flat against the pavement. Moments later, smoke began pouring from the building's windows. Within seconds, flames burst through the upper floors. The broadcast dissolved into confusion. Shouting reporters, camera crews scrambling, the roar of fire filling the microphone. That night, the city changed. Government announcements declared emergency measures. Soldiers appeared on nearly every major corner. Barricades closed streets through the capital. Inside Tuto's house, the doors were closed and the lights kept low. The television murmured constantly in the sitting room, while the adults spoke in quiet tones. For the first time since the market in Tecpán, Leah felt the same tightness return to her chest. It wasn't the crowded aisles or the dim light this time. It was the feeling that the whole city outside the walls had suddenly closed in. She stepped out into the courtyard and drew a slow breath of the cool night air. Beyond the high walls, a soldier shouted somewhere down the street. The house was safe, but the city around it no longer felt open. When Al and Tuto drove out the next morning, they passed through several roadblocks where soldiers checked vehicles before waving them on. But when Tuto spoke with one of them briefly through the window, the soldier stepped back and lifted the barricades. Once they were moving, Leah again looked at him. "How did that work?" she asked. Tuto gave a small shrug. "My wife, Lena," he said calmly. "She is cousin to President Lucas." And in Guatemala, that was enough.